So I was just given a present, a gift, a couple of days ago, and it's a book, and I was reading it on the plane yesterday. It's a book by an educator that you may be familiar with, called Ken Robinson, and he wrote about, he was giving an analogy of a famous ice hockey player years ago called Wayne Gretzky. And he said somebody asked Wayne Gretzky why, on what he based his success and why he was such a brilliant ice hockey player. And Wayne Gretzky replied to him that most players keep their eyes on the puck, on where the puck is, and I keep my eyes on where the puck is going to go. And so that's the cause of my success. And so the analogy here, one which I agree with myself, is saying that in preparing for the future, most effort is put on keeping the eye on the puck, meaning like the present situation rather than where the puck is going to be. So a lot of the talk about preparation for the future is based upon the assumption that basically the future is going to be more or less the same as the present. I think all evidence from the changes that have taken place in the world, particularly over the past 20 or 30 years, would suggest that it's quite the opposite is true. Is that if we can know anything about the future, that it's not going to be very much like the present. And I'm speaking, of course, in reference to the changes wrought in our experience by internet, personal computers, personal telephones, mobile telephones, and so on and so forth. So what we can see is that there are, of course, certain things that are constants in our life that are not affected by these kinds of changes. Love, affection, honesty, loyalty, all these kinds of qualities of heart which will always be things that give life meaning and purpose. But in terms of life in the world, then there are significant changes. And just as many of the things that I studied at school in the 60s and 70s were made redundant. Well, they were made redundant by me becoming a monk, really, but if I hadn't become a monk, they would have been redundant anyway, just through all the technological changes in the world, and I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. And these days people are not pursuing a career from graduation until retirement, as was most often the case in my father's generation. So these kinds of changes mean that whereas there will always be a call, I'm sure, of course, for doctors and teachers and lawyers probably, but in most professions and in many livelihoods, huge changes are going to take place. We don't know for sure just the extent of global warming and what effect that will have, but we can see that just suddenly, almost overnight, huge changes can take place in the society. And in the last weeks and months, the huge impact on European societies by sudden huge influx of refugees. These are constant reminders that we can take nothing for granted, and that things can change not only in a more or less predictable way, but quite often exponentially, or in ways in which no one could have predicted beforehand. So I think it's worth reflecting on these kind of themes when we look at education, and to remind ourselves that although academic excellence is an important goal, of course, then in the preparation for the future, then there are certain qualities of mind, of heart, which will enable us to be able to say, well, whatever happens, my child is ready for that. So that sense of readiness, where does that, what does that reside in, or what does that come from? And I think that one of the chief factors here is a study of the nature of change. We can say that change is an ever-present. It's one of in Buddhism we call it one of the three characteristics of existence. But resistance to change, fear of change, anger at change, these are huge themes in societies throughout the world today, and cause many of the social disruptions and resurgence of fundamentalism and so on and so forth. I think that many of the disturbing and traumatic changes in the world in the present moment are due in fact to a lack of understanding and appreciation of the nature of change and the causes and conditions that underlie change. So encouraging children, encouraging all of us really to look and understand change. So this isn't just saying, yeah, everything changes. What the Buddha is pointing out, that everything changes due to causes and conditions. And that although there are always going to be certain causes and conditions which are concealed, which are not discoverable, we as human beings are capable of understanding this flow of change quite profoundly. And when we understand, as far as possible, the causes and conditions underlying change, then we have a basis for knowing what we need to be patient with, what we can deal with immediately, what takes a longer time to deal with, what can be changed, what can't be changed, how much power we have to influence things, how powerless we are. And this, I think, is one of the great skills that we all need to learn as human beings, and I would hope that children are being able to develop in the school. Now, although the changes can take place, we don't know what global warming is going to do to Thailand and to the world, and we could have another economic collapse like in 2008 at any time. There's all these terrible things that could happen. Maybe good things can happen as well. We don't know. But as I said a few minutes ago, there are certain constants, and for instance that sense of readiness for whatever occurs, and not saying things have to be this way for me to be happy. If they're not this way, then I don't want to live, or it's not worthwhile, or what's the point, or I don't want this, go away. And being able to say, yes, I have the ability to survive and to flourish in any situation. And that's the kind of wisdom that Buddhism is interested in sharing and imparting. It's not saying, well, I just hope that everything's going to be, and then I'll be okay, otherwise I don't know what I'll do. But giving people the resources to be confident that they can live in the world, whatever form that life might take. So there are four areas of knowledge and study that I think are important to emphasize. One is that given that mental suffering, and whether it's all the different forms it can take, is something that we can do something about. we can't do so much about the external triggers or the things that encourage or provoke inner turmoil and suffering. But we can deal effectively, we can train ourselves to deal with our response to those triggers. And I think this is an essential element of education. So how this is expressed in Buddhist tradition is, first of all, learning the ways to prevent the arising of unwholesome or mental states, or negative mental states, or toxic mental states, whatever you like to call them. So how do we live in such a way that we are minimizing, or if possible preventing, the arising of this inner turmoil in the first place? Buddha said, for instance, we bring our attention to the way that we live in families and in our communities, and we can make some very simple observations that if we take no care of, we are heedless about the way that we act and the way that we speak, that we hurt others through our actions or speech, we cheat, we cheat upon partners, we lie, we take alcohol, drugs, legal and illegal, that affect our sense of judgment, then we contribute towards families and communities that lack a sense of safety and trust. And that by refraining from acting in certain ways, speaking in certain ways, we help to create healthy families and communities which nourish the kinds of qualities within us all that we seek to develop, and inhibit the growth of those negative qualities. So here, precepts and sila is not seen as a list of commandments from on high, but as a training, an education of our conduct and our speech, with the goals of creating the most healthy possible community, from the smallest community of the family up to society itself. Secondly, given that it's very unlikely or probably impossible that we can be fully successful in preventing negative mental states from arising, we need to have the tools, and we need to be fluent in the use of the tools to deal with those negative mental states. So I'm proposing that an educated person should know how to deal with states of anxiety, depression, fear, confusion, anger, jealousy, and so on and so forth. All those things that destroy the quality of our life and destroy the quality of our relationships. This should be, absolutely basic knowledge, surely, for an educated human being. When all of us, whether we're Buddhists or Muslims or Christians or of no religion at all, nobody wants to suffer. And if that is in fact the case, then surely one of our main objectives in life should be finding ways to prevent ourselves from suffering, or to deal with the suffering that arises in the most effective and healthy way. So in terms of the future, however the future is going to be, and whatever the particular specific challenges to living in the world and contributing to society and raising a family and leading a good life in the world might be, we can know that whatever the form might be, whether it's raising a family in Chiang Mai or maybe raising a family on a space station on Mars somewhere, then as long as we lack that wisdom and knowledge of how to deal effectively with greed and jealousy and anger and depression and anxiety and confusion and so on and so forth, then we will not be leading a flourishing, happy life. So as far as the the virtues and those qualities of mind which give us uplift and create joy and happiness and fulfillment, that we've codified here to a certain extent in 12 wise habits. These things don't just arise because we want them to be there and through an act of will. They don't just float in somehow, we don't absorb them through the atmosphere. These all are things that arise through change. We change ourselves from how we are now to possessors of or enjoyers of these virtues through understanding of the causes and conditions that underlie their cultivation, and pursuing those causes and conditions, cultivating those causes and conditions in a sustained, systematic, consistent, patient way. And there's no single virtue which cannot arise in any one of our minds. It's like your mind is like a plate or a vessel. So there's not a single food, that could not theoretically be placed upon your plate. Similarly, there's not a single virtue or good quality that cannot arise in your mind if you sustain the causes and conditions necessary for its arising. But even if these beautiful qualities of mind do start to arise, the problem is that they're not fixed into the mind once they've arisen, that they can very easily disappear if we don't know how to take care of them. So they're like young saplings. So I'm switching my analogies here from food to a sapling, and you have to know how to water it and take care of it and look after it and develop it further and further. So one is a teaching of the Buddha, which is not so well known, is the teaching of discontent. So the Buddha, as you probably do know, taught that we should be content with those things that we have gained, amassed and earned through the honest sweat of our brows, and take pride in those things, even if they're not the very best or the most expensive or not as good as somebody else's, but being able to enjoy and take a good pride in those things that we have earned honestly in our life. That's the teaching of contentment with regard to the material surroundings. But the Buddha said, as regards virtues and goodness, kindness and generosity, and he said, be discontent, never be satisfied. There's not so, okay, I've done this many acts of generosity, that's good enough, or I have this amount of mindfulness or this amount of wisdom, or there's this constant effort to go forward and to keep pushing and developing more and more, and that very effort to develop those virtues is in itself a source of great joy. So in an all-round development and the wisdom development, Buddha's teaching there's 3 levels of wisdom. There's Suttamaya Panya, sorry for this Pali, there's Jintamaya Panya and Pavanamaya Panya. So Suttamaya Panya means all that wisdom that comes from listening and reading and learning, being able to memorize things well, being smart about memorization, being able to understand, to summarize, to expand, to be able to pass on accurately things you've learned, to be able to compare and contrast, to prioritize, to apply knowledge that you've learned. These are all in the first level of wisdom, what Buddha called Suttamaya Panya. Jintamaya Panya is that wisdom of using the mind constructively, learning how to analyze, to discriminate, to prioritize, to evaluate, to apply principles, for instance, Buddhist principles of the long-term benefit of self and others to different activities, and to see, for instance, whether a particular life choice is in harmony or not in harmony with one's principles and goals. And these kinds of application of the mind, a wise application of the mind, and then creativity. Well, if you didn't do it like this, what other ways do you think? Can you think of a design to increase the quality of life for the people around you? Can you imagine something? Can you put yourself in other people's shoes? Can you solve this problem? So all those creative thinking skills are all included in this Jintamaya Panya. And then finally there is the Pavanamaya Panya. And this is the uniquely Buddhist contribution, that only when the mind has the stability and clarity and freedom from the usual obscurations of sensual desire and aversions and dullness and agitation and doubts, and when the mind has a stillness and a clarity and a stability and a flexibility of mind. These things might sound contradictory. How can you have stability and flexibility? Well, yeah, that's why you have to do it yourself, and you can understand why that can be possible. But it's that mind which is able to develop a clear, penetrative understanding of the way things are, understanding the body, the mind, our life, the world, in their true light. And this is the crowning glory of the human condition, to be able to develop this kind of wisdom, and it's not in conflict with those other kinds of wisdom. So in this school, then there is the teaching of these basic, elemental, fundamental thinking skills, critical, creative thinking skills, of course, which will stand the child in good stead in any academic endeavors, but also trying to include this Pavanamaya Panya, this wisdom and understanding based on the ability to look at the student. The student looks at the student, the mind looks at the mind, learning about the human condition, and being able to develop the tools and the skills to make the very best of our life as a human being. So these are some of my ideas about ways of developing and preparing for the future, whatever it might be.
So we have some time for questions and comments. There is paper and pencils around. Please pass them to our staff, and they'll get passed to the front, and we can read them one by one, and we can swap between the two languages.
ต่อไปเป็นช่วงตอบคำถามนะคะสตาฟของเราจะประจำอยู่ทางด้านข้างถ้าเกิดท่านใดต้องการกระดาษและดินสอนะคะสามารถบอกสตาฟได้ค่ะเพื่อที่จะเขียนคำถามแล้วเดี๋ยวเราจะอ่านคำถามต่อพระอาจารย์ค่ะ
Namaskar, Tanaja. Please say a few words about the current state of Thai Buddhism. Do you feel like Buddhism is in decline, in inverted commas?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. So it's always important, isn't it, to recognize what you know, what you know you don't know, and I belong to an organization of some 300,000 people, and the direct experience I have of monks and monasteries is extremely limited, and so it is obviously biased, and that most of the monks that I meet and are my friends and colleagues are in the forest tradition, which is probably one of the most solid and inspiring groups within the Sangha at large. Obviously, I think it doesn't need to be said that the media are essentially selling news as a product. So news, what appears in newspapers and various media are not kind of a mirror held up to society, but these are things chosen in order to make money, basically. And in Thailand, we're still looking on the good side, and we're still living in a society in which people are very interested in monks, even, and especially the prurient interest in bad monks or monks doing naughty things that they're not supposed to do. But and there have always been monks like that. If you read the discourses of the Buddha, extremely inspiring. But if you were ever to read the books of the monk's discipline, and which give little stories, of the monk's misbehaviour leading to the establishment of all the rules, it's quite a different picture. So there have always been naughty monks and monks doing unmonkish things. The question is, of course, to what extent are the stories that appear in the newspapers and in the news a reflection, of a genuine and worrying decline, and to what extent there could we say, well, if you have 300,000 monks and you just had 1% of them were bad monks, you'd have enough for a scandalous story on the front page of your newspaper every day of the year. So I really not sure. I mean, this scandalous stories and have been, in the news since the last 40 years, or since I've been here. I'm sure predated that. I do suspect that things are not so good. That's more of a guess. One of the reasons, I think, if looking at the reasons for this, there are many. But one important factor, I think, is that in the monk's discipline, it's forbidden for monks to accept money in any way or form, or to have any power over money. But even within a few years or 100 years of the Buddha's passing away, this rule was already subject of much dispute. And certainly we can say in Thailand, then for a very long time, most monks in Thailand, 90-something% of monks in Thailand, do receive money. Now, up to about 40-50 years ago, particularly in out of the cities, monks having money and not having money wasn't really very an issue, because villages didn't have any money either, and the monks would just have a few baht to buy a pack of cigarettes, or buy some tobacco, or buy some, just basic necessities. But it wasn't like a big deal. But then with the changes and the development of Thai society, and so much more money around, and then that money coming into the monastery, and the vast majority of monks neither having the protection of all the rules in the monk's discipline concerning money, and also the majority of monks not meditating and having the spiritual and moral qualities to be able to resist the pull of money. This, I think, has clearly led to a great decline of standards, and some, what I can say, I've seen directly, seeing the corruption and the problems through monks accepting money, and the kinds of competition and for prestigious appointments and so on and so forth, in which more financial donations are likely. So there are, in my tradition, in the forest tradition, I think one of the reasons why it is still reasonably strong and thriving is precisely because do try to be very scrupulous with this rule. So there are a lot of uninspiring monks and monasteries around, but I would also say from my own experience that there are also a lot of very good monks and nuns, an increasing number of very good nuns around now practicing throughout the country, and so it's a mixed bag, and where the exact balance between where the balance between the good monks and the bad monks, or the indications of a thriving or institution and an institution in terminal decline. I just have no idea really where the line is to be drawn.
กราบนมัสการพระอาจารย์ค่ะคณะสงฆ์ผู้ที่รู้หลักคำสอนแต่ยังปล่อยให้มีการทุจริตแม้แต่ในวงการสอนนักธรรมแนวทางแก้ไขทำอย่างไรดีเจ้าคะ
ก็ต่อจากเรื่องเมื่อกี้นี้เนาะไม่รู้จะตอบยังไงฮะมันคือทุกวันนี้การกลั่นกรองผู้ที่จะขอบวชในวัดจะน้อยมากแต่จะไม่มีความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างพระอุปัชฌาย์อาจารย์กับลูกศิษย์ก็ไม่แทบจะไม่มีเหมือนแต่ก่อนนั่นเมื่อการดูแลการอบรมสั่งสอนคนใหม่ขาดตกบกพร่องถึงขนาดนี้แล้วก็ไม่แปลกใจว่าความทุจริตจะเกิดขึ้นนั่นก็อยู่ที่ระบบการปกครองของสงฆ์ทีนี้ในเมื่อผู้ที่จะบวชลดน้อยลงก็เป็นเรื่องธรรมดาว่าวัดกลัวจะไม่มีใครอยู่วัดกลัววัดไม่ครบหารูปจะไม่มีกฐินหรือว่าวัดกลัวจะร้างก็เลยไม่กล้าเข้มงวดมากถ้าเข้มงวดมากกลัวจะไม่มีใครมาอยู่ก็เลยเป็นเหตุที่ทำให้มาตรฐานอะไรต่างๆก็ต่ำลงทีนี้ในเรื่องการสอนนักธรรมมันที่จริงมันต้องมีพระพี่เลี้ยงหรือพระผู้ใหญ่คุมแต่ถ้าผู้คุมไม่สุจริตก็เลยปัญหาเหมือนเดิมว่าใครจะเป็นตำรวจดูแลตำรวจใครจะเป็นผู้ใหญ่ดูแลผู้ใหญ่เลยไม่มีคำตอบที่ดีในเรื่องนี้
English question, Namaskar Tanajan. What is your definition of meditation?
I don't use the word very much, to tell you the truth. It's kind of a hybrid word that very popular in the West, but I think that its use of the word meditation has been actually probably more of a hindrance than a help to many people. The word that the Buddha used is pavana, which is strictly translated as cultivation. And so the four kinds of cultivation which use in relation to education system as well as to more general spiritual growth is a cultivation of the relationship of human being and the material world, cultivation of the relationship between the human being and the social world, the cultivation of the heart, meaning the skills of abandoning the unwholesome and developing the wholesome, and the development and cultivation of the wisdom faculty. So what we would call meditation or formal meditation is one kind of pavana, and to begin with, it's essentially the citta pavana, the development or cultivation of the heart. So in a meditation practice, sitting with your eyes closed, what are you doing? You're putting forth effort to prevent hindrances from arising, from dealing wisely, effectively with hindrances that have arisen by cultivating enlightenment factors and that have not yet arisen, and of developing enlightenment factors called bojjhangas that have already arisen. So I think why it's important to use this kind of model is to prevent this. Oh, I don't have any time to meditate these days, or this. It's all very well doing this, but we're not doing any meditation these days, as if this is the practice. No, the practice is the cultivation of body, speech, and mind, and the what we call the formal practice of sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed or walking up and down. This is just one part of an integrated whole. We can say it's the heart of the practice, that it's the most profoundly transformative of all the practices of pavana, but it is only truly effective in a Buddhist sense when it is developed within the context of that fourfold cultivation.
กราบนมัสการพระอาจารย์เจ้าค่ะเด็กๆบอกว่าพวกเขาสามารถควบคุมดูแลตนเองให้ทำในสิ่งที่ถูกต้องได้ดีเมื่ออยู่กับครูแต่หากไม่มีครูท่านนี้ก็ง่ายที่จะทำตามใจกรณีนี้เราจะแนะนำหรือพัฒนาพวกเขาให้สามารถดูแลตนเองได้ดีโดยที่ไม่มีครูท่านนี้ได้อย่างไรเจ้าคะ
ก็ธรรมดาเนี่ยถ้าเป็นอันธพาลก็ไม่กล้าขโมยของที่อยู่ต่อหน้าตำรวจแต่นั้นไม่ได้หมายความว่าเป็นคนดีนะมันก็ต้องเกิดจากฮิริโอตัปปะอย่างที่ว่าเราขโมยของแล้วก็ไม่มีใครเห็นในบางคนก็โอ้สบายเลยลอยนวลไม่มีใครเห็นนะแต่หลวงพ่อชาบอกถ้าอย่างนั้นมันดูถูกตัวเองสิเพราะว่าตัวเราเห็นเหมือนกับตัวเราไม่ใช่คนเราก็คนเหมือนกันคนอื่นเขาเห็นไม่เห็นแต่ตัวเราเห็นนี่พระอรหันต์เป็นผู้ที่ในหลักบอกว่าไม่มีตัวหน้ารับหลังตัวหน้าเป็นยังไงรับหลังก็เป็นแต่ถ้าหากว่าเราดีเฉพาะเวลามีคนดูแล้วก็ไม่ดีจริงใช่ใครก็เหมือนกันถ้ามีคนมองก็ไม่กล้าทำผิดแต่ถ้าครูหันหลังหรือว่าผู้ใหญ่หันหลังแล้วก็ทำเลยแสดงว่าศีลยังไม่ใช่ศีลคือการถือศีลและการถือสิกขาบทต่างๆที่เราใช้ภาษาที่ทำให้สับสนเหมือนกันเลยว่าศีลห้าจริงๆเป็นสิกขาบท5 ข้อเราฝึกกายวาจาตามสิกขาบท5 ข้อสิกขาบทคือบทสิกขาบทศึกษาบทฝึกหัดทำไมเราจึงฝึกพฤติกรรมฝึกวาจาด้วยสิกขาบท5 ข้อเพื่อจะเกิดศีลภายในศีลก็คุณธรรมที่เกิดภายในถ้าหากว่าเราไม่ทำเพียงเพราะว่ากลัวเขาจับกลัวคนวิพากษ์วิจารณ์กลัวคนลงโทษยังไม่ใช่ศีลก็เป็นความเรียบร้อยระดับหนึ่งดีกว่าไม่กลัวใครเลยแต่ศีลต้องเกิดจากความเข้าใจต้องเกิดจากปัญญาที่เห็นโทษว่าทำไมเราจึงไม่ให้ทำอย่างนั้นทำไมเพื่ออะไรเราจึงต้องทำเด็กก็ต้องเข้าใจว่าถ้าไม่ทำแล้วก็จะเกิดโทษอย่างนี้ถ้าเรางดเว้นถ้าเราควบคุมได้มันจะเกิดผลดีอย่างนี้ซึ่งอันนี้ก็คือบทบาทหรือว่าความสำคัญของปัญญาตามหลักนี่ว่าศีลสมาธิปัญญาจริงๆแล้วมันปัญญาต้องมาก่อนปัญญาศีลสมาธิ ปัญญามันก็เป็นวงกลมแต่ถ้าเราไม่เห็นชัดกับตัวเองว่าทำไมต้องทำอย่างนี้ฉันทะก็ไม่เกิดฉันทะก็ไม่เกิดแล้วจะวิริยะความเพียรในการงดเว้นจากสิ่งที่ควรงดเว้นจากความเพียรมันก็ไม่เกิดแล้วเมื่ออยู่ที่การให้เด็กเข้าใจอย่างเมื่อกี้นี้ที่เทศที่ว่าการไม่เบียดเบียนและการถือศีลเป็นการให้ทานเป็นการให้ความปลอดภัยนี่ดีนะถ้าเราไม่ทำอย่างนี้เราให้ความปลอดภัยให้ความสบายใจทุกคนมันน่าภูมิใจน่าจะทำอย่างนี้แล้วก็ถ้าหากว่าเราสามารถให้เด็กเห็นว่าถ้าเราตั้งใจทำอะไรสักอย่างหรือว่าอยากทำมากแต่ไม่ทำเพราะไม่ถูกต้องถ้ามีการยั่วยุหรือมีการกดดันให้ละเมิดแต่เราอดทนไม่ทำจนกระทั่งความอยากทำหายไปแล้วตรงนั้นนะที่ผู้เป็นครูและผู้ปกครองต้องให้เด็กเห็นว่ารู้สึกยังไงเวลาชนะใจจริงๆเมื่อกี้เนี่ยว่าอยากทำมากใช่ไหมอยากทำเหลือเกินนะถ้าไม่ทำจะระเบิดแต่จริงๆแล้วระเบิดไม่ระเบิดแล้วเป็นยังไงตอนนี้ก็เฉยเอาจำไว้ว่าเวลาเราแบบอยากทำจริงๆไม่ทำไม่ได้ต้องทำถ้าเราอดทนดูมันไปรู้มันไปดูมันไปรู้มันไปมันจะไปถึงไหนสุดท้ายมันก็ดับของมันเองแล้วเราก็ได้ชนะใจตัวเองและชนะใจครั้งแรกนี่ยากแต่ครั้งที่สองง่ายขึ้นเพราะเราจำได้ว่าเราก็เคยชนะไปแล้วคราวที่แล้วชนะได้ทำไมคราวนี้จะชนะไม่ได้นั้นเราก็ต้องให้เห็นบริบทในเรื่องการฝึกตนและว่าเพื่อประโยชน์อะไรอย่างไร
In one of your lectures on CDs, you said that when one doesn't understand the 5 aggregates, this results in misery. Mm-hmm. Can you explain more on this?
I always wonder what's coming when somebody says, once in one of your talks you said. In the very first discourse of the Buddha, it's called the Dhamma Sutta, which the Buddha delivered to the 5 ascetics in the Deer Park in Benares. This is such a wonderful teaching that probably a number of you are familiar with, but there are a number of interesting features from the point of view of a teacher. So the Buddha arrives, he's walked like 200 something kilometers in order to teach these 5 men, former students who had great hopes, looked at him as a teacher, but because they believed that the only way to enlightenment was through tormenting the body. The idea is that like the spirit is encased in the body, and that by tormenting the body and overcoming the body, then you release the spirit, some idea like this. So when the Buddha gave up on that, having determined that it wasn't the way to enlightenment, they concluded from that he'd given up. That's the only way they could understand it. And of course they always had in the back of their mind that he's a prince, he can give up whenever he wants. He can go back and be a prince and a king, it's no big deal for him, but we've given up all these years of our life and half killed ourselves. We don't have anything to go back to in the same way. So they're very resentful. So the Buddha arrives, and they see him, and he sort of felt resentful towards the Buddha, and they're not going to get up, and they're not going to wash his feet and show the traditional signs of respect for a leader, an honoured guest. But then they find they can't help themselves. There's just something about him that's not like he was before. So there's a little bit of kind of a little bit of relaxation of the tensions, but they still have this this negative feeling. So what does the Buddha do? How does the Buddha start his first ever teaching? He doesn't go into enlightenment and nibbana. What he starts off with, he says, like the path of sensual indulgence is not the path to deliverance. So you can imagine they must be kind of like totally shocked, because they're looking at him as someone who's given up the path to enlightenment in order to return to the path of sensual indulgence. And he's just telling them, first thing that comes out of his mouth is, the path of sensual indulgence is not the path to enlightenment, it's an extreme. So now, he's caught their attention. Wow, well then, does that mean you're coming back? You've seen the error of your ways, you're going to be our leader again, and then he says, and the path of self-mortification is also not the path to enlightenment. It's an extreme. So now they're totally, what else is there? And then the Buddha starts to teach the Noble Eightfold Path as the middle way between two extremes. So this wisdom of the Buddha in terms of taking into account the knowledge, the understanding, the emotions of the listener, not just saying this is the Dhamma, it's like this, but taking into account the audience. I find that really profound and inspiring. So the Buddha, having sort of delivered this bombshell, then how does he start off explaining the Dhamma? He starts off with suffering. So he's not starting off with telling you like gods and goddesses and heaven realms and nibbana and all this incredibly inspiring stuff, which you may or may not believe. But he's starting off with, let's talk about life as a human being. What's going on here? So you start off on this really solid ground. And again, as teaching, if you want to teach a child, you teach anyone who's not yet interested, where do you start? You start off where someone's suffering, because that's what people are interested in. So the Buddha's starting off with suffering. And then, so he starts off, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering, death, that makes sense. Not get separation from what you love is suffering, that makes sense. Having to be with people and things you don't like, that's miserable, that makes sense. And then not getting what you want, so the Buddha's going through these things step by step. And then he comes to this, in essence, the attachment to the five khandhas is suffering. So this is a whole kind of new level of discourse, isn't it? So what the five khandhas, and presumably these are terms that the Buddha, the disciples were familiar with already, that they were terms in current use by meditators or cultivators at that time. So these five five khandhas, or aggregates, are the physical body, feelings, that's the feeling tone of experience as either pleasant, unpleasant or neutral, and then sanya, which is difficult to translate. Usually it's translated as perception, but it's that kind of knowing that knows the name of things. You see something, oh, that's a human being, and it gets a bit closer and you say, it's a woman, oh, it's my mum. So this perception, or you hear a sound, and you hear it's the sound of a bell. So that's the sound of a bell. That's sanya, and then that's the sound of the bell, meaning the end of the lesson. So there's two levels of sanya. There's one, the perception of a sound of a bell. The second, the perception of the meaning of the sound of the bell. So it can get quite complex. So it's in some respects, sanya is what we call memory, but it's also perception, the naming of things. So if you see something you've never seen before, let's say you see an animal you've never seen before, what happens in your brain? You say, what's that? I don't know what that is. Well, it's like, its head's a bit like a cat, but its body's more like a panther, so you take things that you already have in your mind, and try to create some new name or some new concept, and to attach that to this new thing. This is sanya. Sankhara, this is the what we could call the karma creating element of the mind. So it's all of the positive and negative elements of the mind which are gathered together in one sort of apparently miscellaneous group because they are united by cetana or intention. These are things that create, there's something coming from within. So sanya is nothing to do with intention, just happens by itself. Vedana just happens by itself, it's the result of past karma. But whether you like something or dislike it, you choose to be angry and confused, there is some element of initiation from within, of intention. So this is the unifying factor for this fourth khandha of sankhara. And the fifth is vijnana, which is the simple reception, the knowledge of sense data, I, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. So this is a way of talking about the human being by dividing it into 5 different aspects, the physical and then the mental divided into 4, into feeling, tone of experience, perceptions, the naming of things, recognition of things, then positive, negative, cetana or intention, defined elements of the mind, and then sense consciousness. And so the Buddha said it's essentially because we don't understand, we don't have a clear understanding of these 5 khandhas and the way that they relate to each other, the way they arise and they pass away, this stream of experience, which is essentially the 5 khandhas, that moment by moment we create a sense of self and a sense of ownership. So this is me, this is mine. So if we've got to get a bad back, sitting too long, you say, oh, my back hurts. So it's all we've done is we've taken the body and we've taken ownership of it. So it's my back, or I feel really happy right now. This is taking ownership, creating a sense of self out of vedana, out of feeling. Or you say, oh, I remember when Ajahn Jayasaro came last time. That's sanya. Or you say, oh, I really like this talk, or I'm really bored by this talk. This is sankhara. And the sense of the ear, the sound of my voice, contacting your ear, that's vijnana. So it's a way of deconstructing this, the way in which we create this illusory idea of an independent, self-existent entity called me, out of this flow of phenomena, which can be distinguished as 5 different streams or 5 khandhas, which the Buddha sort of is the ultimate source of suffering.
This will have to be the last question, I'm afraid. Namaste Dhamma. Is there a way that Buddhism can contribute to an agriculture that heals the earth and produces food with spiritual value, instead of destroying the environment and people's health?
Yeah. Please. Why not? Yes. I mean, the thing I think to consider is that we all, as human beings, have many identities, like conventional identities. When your child is crying or in pain, your identity is a caring parent. At that moment, you don't have your sense of yourself as a citizen of Thailand or as a Buddhist meditator. You are a parent worried about this child, and in every day. We go through many different identities, depending on the circumstance and conditions, and if we meditate or we're going beyond the thinking mind, then we can go beyond the sense of any identity. But that's unusual. But I would say that in Thailand, generally we say, well, Thailand is a Buddhist country. But if we look at it in a slightly different way, and I would say that most of the time, most Thais' primary identity is as a Thai person, as a member, as a Thai citizen. And their identity as a Buddhist is secondary. So they are both, but the identity as a Thai comes first for most people, and maybe identity. So they think, well, why all these questions about why? Well, Buddhist country. Why is it like this? Why is it like that? I think it's based on a mistaken idea of how we are as human beings. It's not people. Well, me as a Buddhist, I decide that I'm going to do this stupid or corrupt thing. At that moment, people are not identifying themselves as a Buddhist, and I think this is one of the reasons, like with the conflict in the south of Thailand, where generally most, I would say, and this is generalization, that most Muslims their primary identification is as a Muslim rather than as a citizen of the country. And so in any kind of conflict, like the default Muslim position is to see it as a religious conflict. So in the south of Thailand it's like a Buddhist-Muslim conflict, which I don't think it is. I think that many Muslims perceive it to be that. But I don't think that many of the Thai people involved in that conflict in any way, or either in a positive or a negative way, are conceiving this as anything to do with Buddhism v Islam. But it's a matter of identity, how they're identifying themselves as representatives of the Thai state, or representatives of Thai civil service, or Thais out to make some money, or whatever it might be. In Thailand, although it's a Buddhist country, there are so many things that go on in this country which are based upon non-Buddhist principles, or principles that seem to be a complete betrayal of Buddhist principles. But that's because people are not thinking primarily as Buddhists. They're thinking as, I want to make as much money as I can for my family and send my child to a good school. And yes, this may have a long-term effect on the soil, but as long as I can get my kids set up well in their life, then that's okay. I mean, that's the kind. And that's not. So what can Buddhism do? Well, Buddhism is encouraging people to adopt the Buddhist identity a little bit more often, and using it to inform decisions about their life a little bit more often, to be more Buddhist than they are right now. So in the sense that Buddhism is teaching not to take short-term gratification as a guide in life, but to be able to stand back from pressures and desires, and to be able to make more wise choices, both for oneself and the communities one lives in, and to lead a livelihood which is not harming oneself or others, or people who have not yet been born. Then definitely that's what Buddhism should be teaching. But I've spent time with very poor communities in various parts of this country, and I know that if you're really poor and you don't know where what your children are going to eat tonight, your worry about the environmental destruction caused by cutting down trees in the forest for a sawmill owner, are not going to be very strong. You say, well, how can a Buddhist do that? Buddhists love nature. I said, nature's lovely, but basically, my children are more important than nature. So what I see is that people prioritize. Yes, rather not good people and bad people. People prioritize, and often there are many people who are very honest and thoughtful and willing to make sacrifices when they are alone. Are compromised. This is maybe not such a polite word to use to parents, but are compromised by children, and that people are willing to make exceptions for the safety and the well-being of their children, and do things that, in the heart of hearts, they may know are really not so wise or not so good. So, yeah, I mean, certainly, in the terms of that question was answered that, yeah, I'm all for people growing organic crops and doing things that are good for the soil. And I've participated in many projects to promote that over the years in the countryside, and am to this day. But it's very piecemeal and needs something from the top downwards as well.